My parents refused to invest in my business, but they helped my sisters, and then it failed. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lane Harper. I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, I've worked hard to build something of my own. I've always been the kind of person who puts my head down and gets things done. I wasn't the loud, charming type like my younger sister Mira, but I had determination. For years, I'd been running a small, eco-friendly catering service on the side. It started out simple: friends' birthday parties, local church events, a couple of small weddings. Word spread because people liked the food and the idea behind it. Everything was sustainable, everything sourced locally. I saw a real future in it. I spent months writing out a proper business plan. I calculated costs, expected profits, even backup plans in case things didn't go smoothly. I didn't just dream, I prepared. I knew I needed help to scale up, though. My savings were small, and I couldn't get very far with the few $1,000s I'd managed to put aside. So one evening, I sat down with my parents, Richard and Marla. They're good, steady people. My dad worked in insurance, my mom in accounting. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. I thought, just maybe, they'd see how serious I was. I laid out everything in front of them at the kitchen table. The folder with charts, budgets, ideas for expansion. My hands were shaking as I spoke, but I was proud of what I had created. When I finished, I waited. My mom was the first to speak. She sighed and said, "Lane, it sounds nice, but catering? That's unstable. What if people don't keep ordering? What if the economy turns? It's too risky." My dad nodded in agreement. "We can't just throw money at dreams," he added, like my whole plan was nothing more than a fantasy scribbled in a notebook. I felt my throat tighten. I had spent months preparing for that conversation, and they dismissed it in less than 5 minutes. I tried to push back, pointing out the numbers, showing them the small profits I had already made. But they shook their heads. "Sweetheart, you should be grateful you even have a steady job at the bakery," my mom said, as if ambition was something to be ashamed of. I nodded, even though I felt crushed. I didn't want to beg. If they couldn't see my vision, I wasn't going to force them. Still, walking back to my room that night, clutching my folder, I felt invisible. Like all the effort I had poured into proving myself meant nothing to them. And that's when the resentment started to grow. Mira Harper, my younger sister, was 24 and everything I wasn't. She had this effortless charm, the kind that made people lean in when she talked. She could make a boring story sound like the most exciting thing in the world. Growing up, she was always the one who got the spotlight. Teachers adored her. Relatives couldn't stop bragging about her. And my parents, well, they made it no secret that she was their pride. One night at dinner, Mira announced she had a brilliant idea. With a dramatic pause and a smile that could sell sunshine, she said she wanted to open a boutique. Fashion, she explained, was her passion, and she was sure she could make it work. She had no numbers, no strategy, not even a real concept. Just a few sketches she'd doodled and a Pinterest board she flashed across her phone. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, waiting for my parents to question her. Waiting for them to ask the same hard questions they had asked me. But instead, my mom's eyes lit up like Mira had just announced she'd cured cancer. "Oh, honey, that's perfect for you," she said, clapping her hands together. My dad leaned back, nodding in approval. "Yes, I can see that. You've always had a sense of style. A store could really work." They didn't ask about location. They didn't ask about rent or overhead costs. They didn't ask about competition. None of the things they had grilled me on. Instead, they jumped straight into excitement. Within days, they were already discussing funding. Tens of thousands of dollars. That's what they offered her, without hesitation. Money they told me they couldn't risk, when it was my turn. Mira soaked it up, flipping her hair and talking about all the exclusive pieces she'd stock. She didn't even hide how little she'd thought it through. "I'll figure it out as I go," she laughed, like the world was just waiting to bend to her will. I smiled tightly through the whole dinner, nodding when someone looked my way, pretending not to notice the knife twisting deeper every time they praised her vision. Inside, though, it was like fire under my skin. For years, I had worked to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. I had done the research, tested the market, shown results. And it hadn't mattered. All Mira had to do was toss out a pretty idea, and suddenly the doors of generosity swung wide open. That night, when I went to bed, I stared at the ceiling and clenched my fists until my nails left marks in my palms. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of approval anymore. If they couldn't see me now, I'd make sure they couldn't ignore me later. I didn't say a word to anyone. But in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would succeed without them, and one day they'd regret the choice they made. The weeks after Myra's announcement turned into a blur of long days and longer nights. I picked up every extra shift I could at the bakery, waking up before sunrise to prep dough, then staying late to close. On top of that, I took small side jobs, designing menus for a diner, helping a neighbor with event planning, anything that brought in a few extra dollars. My body ached most of the time, but quitting wasn't an option. Every cent mattered. Meanwhile, family dinners became a stage for Mira. She would arrive in new outfits, waving receipts like trophies, talking about fabrics and displays she was planning for her store. Her words spilled out faster than the wine my parents poured into her glass. "Wait until you see the storefront," she'd say, eyes shining. "It's going to be so chic." My mom would lean in, hanging on every detail. My dad would nod with that proud smile, the kind I had secretly wanted directed at me. And me? I sat there, chewing quietly, stabbing at potatoes that suddenly tasted like sand. No one asked how I was doing. No one cared about the hours I was working, the side hustles I was juggling, the exhaustion I was barely holding back. I might as well have been a ghost at that table. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way my parents lit up at Myra's smallest accomplishment. A signed lease, a painted wall, a new logo scribbled on a napkin. All of it was celebrated like a victory. I had presented results, real proof that my idea worked, and got brushed aside. Mira floated in with nothing but enthusiasm, and they treated her like a visionary. Every dinner felt heavier. I started dreading the sound of my phone buzzing with a message from my mom. "Sunday, 6 o'clock, don't be late." I would drag myself there anyway, because avoiding it would only raise questions, but each time I walked through that door, the air in the house seemed to press down on me. I tried to smile, to act polite, to keep my head down, but inside I was boiling. Their laughter at Myra's jokes sounded like nails on glass. Their praise for her courage made my chest tighten. It wasn't just favoritism anymore, it was betrayal. I would drive home after those nights, gripping the steering, while so tight my knuckles went white. Some evenings I pulled over just to breathe, to let the anger settle before I got back on the road. Because that anger was turning into something I didn't fully recognize. The more they ignored me, the more I hardened. I stopped hoping for approval. I stopped wishing they would notice me. Deep down, something darker took root. A quiet, simmering resentment that dug in deeper every time Mira opened her mouth. And though I never said a word, I carried that fire with me everywhere. The day of the boutique's launch arrived like a holiday my family had been waiting for. Balloons framed the entrance, glittery banners hung across the windows, and a small crowd gathered outside even before the doors opened. Mira had spared no expense. Champagne glasses clinked, trays of hors d'oeuvres passed from hand to hand, and music pulsed from rented speakers. I showed up because not attending would have been impossible to explain, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew I didn't belong. The boutique gleamed in pastel shades, racks filled with clothes arranged like art pieces. Mira floated from group to group, laughing, hugging, soaking up compliments as if the whole night had been designed to crown her queen of the town. Relatives gathered around, snapping photos and gushing about how proud they were. My parents stood near the register, beaming like they had just witnessed their child receive an award. They welcomed each guest with warm words, as though they had built the place themselves. I drifted through the crowd, glass of sparkling cider in hand, more spectator than participant. Strangers chatted around me, cousins gossiped about which dress they wanted to buy first, and my sister basked in it all. Not one person asked me what I thought. Not one person cared where I fit into this perfect little picture. At one point, I slipped into the back of the store to escape the noise. That's when I caught my mother's voice through the thin wall separating the stockroom from the main floor. "She's the one with the real business sense," she said, pride dripping from every word. My chest tightened. She wasn't talking about me. She never had been. She meant Mira, of course. My father's agreement followed, his low tone carrying the same certainty. The words landed like a weight pressing down on my ribs. Real business sense. After all the work I had poured into proving myself, they had written me off completely. I pressed my hand to the wall, listening as they went on praising Mira to some distant cousin, their voices rising with excitement, their faith in her shining through every sentence. I set down my glass, suddenly unable to stomach even the sweetness of the cider. The noise from the party, the laughter, the toasts, it all felt like it was closing in on me. I walked back through the boutique, unnoticed in the chaos, and headed for the exit. Mira didn't even see me leave. My parents were too busy entertaining their guests. No one called after me. No one noticed the quiet shadow slipping out the door. Outside, the evening air was cool against my face. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching through the glass as the celebration carried on without me. Then I turned and walked away. That night, I made a decision. Whatever came next, I would do it alone. I would never ask them for anything again. Life after the boutique opening felt quieter for me, but I didn't let the silence stop me. I kept my head down and built what I could with what little I had. My catering started small. A backyard wedding where the bride's uncle grilled me with questions, a retirement party in a church hall, a luncheon for a local real estate office. Each job came from the last, names passed along, neighbors whispering recommendations. I didn't have the luxury of flashy advertising or fancy storefronts. My business moved through word of mouth alone, one plate at a time. It was slow, almost painfully so, but steady. Each time someone called back to say, "A friend told me about your food," it gave me enough fuel to keep going. Every penny I made went straight back into the work. If I earned $50, 45 of it went toward supplies. I stopped going out with friends, turned down dinners, skipped birthdays. I cut away pieces of my personal life and fed them into the business like wood into a fire. It was the only way forward. The hardest sacrifice came when I sold my car. It wasn't much, an old sedan that still rattled when I hit the brakes, but it had been my freedom. Letting it go hurt, but I needed an industrial mixer more than I needed 4 wheels. I told myself I'd find a way to manage without it, even if it meant walking home after midnight shifts with flour still in my hair. Months blurred together, and exhaustion lived in my bones. But alongside the fatigue came tiny victories. People started remembering my name. Guests at events would slip me their numbers, asking if I was available for their own gatherings. Slowly, the circles widened. One afternoon, I was catering a modest corporate luncheon in a rented hall. Nothing fancy, sandwiches, fruit, pastries. I didn't know the hotel manager was in attendance until he asked to speak with me after the meal. He introduced himself, handed me a card, and said, "We host a lot of events at our property. We could use someone like you." My heart nearly stopped. The following week, I brought samples to his office. I spent hours perfecting those dishes, hands shaking as I set the plates down in front of him. He tasted everything carefully, then looked at me and said, "When can you start?" That moment felt like a door cracking open to a new world. It wasn't a fortune, not yet, but it was a steady contract with a respected hotel. Regular events, guaranteed paychecks, and most importantly, credibility. I walked out of that meeting holding the signed agreement, my legs trembling. No one at home knew. No one celebrated with me. But I carried that paper like it was made of gold, because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something real. And I was doing it entirely on my own. The shine around Myra's shop didn't last long. At first, the shelves looked full and the music from her speakers poured out into the street. But soon I noticed the racks weren't moving. Weeks passed, and the same dresses hung in the windows like tired decorations. The location was tucked away on a quiet block where foot traffic was rare, yet she acted surprised when people didn't rush in. Her prices didn't help either. A blouse cost more than what most folks in town spent on groceries for a week. Friends who stopped by told me later they had walked out after checking a single tag. Mira hadn't researched her market at all. She picked what she thought looked exclusive and assumed people would line up for it. Bills started stacking up faster than sales. Instead of tightening her spending, she leaned harder on my parents. I overheard them whispering about helping with her rent, covering utilities, even paying for another shipment of clothing that no one had asked for. They shook their heads but still pulled out their checkbook every time. "It's only a slow start," my dad would say, more to himself than anyone else. My mom echoed him, repeating that things would pick up soon. They convinced themselves her struggles were temporary. The way you convince yourself storm clouds are just passing when you know rain is on the way. I kept my mouth shut. Part of me wanted to point out every mistake, every blind spot she refused to see. But I didn't. I smiled when expected, stirred my coffee, and acted like her troubles were none of my concern. Inside, though, there was a quiet, undeniable satisfaction. For once, the golden child was stumbling. Family dinners took on a different tone. Instead of glowing with excitement, Mira showed up scowling, dropping her purse onto a chair with a heavy sigh. She would stab at her food and launch into long speeches about why things weren't working. "It's this economy," she complained, waving her fork in the air. "Nobody's spending money like they used to." Or, "This town doesn't appreciate fashion. People here have no taste." Sometimes she blamed her staff for not selling hard enough, even though she had only hired 2 part-time workers who looked like they were doing their best to keep the lights on. My parents nodded along, comforting her, assuring her that it wasn't her fault. "You'll get through this," they said, piling reassurance on top of excuses. I sat across the table, chewing quietly, my lips pressed into something that looked like a polite smile. But beneath that mask, a different feeling was growing. I didn't gloat, not out loud. Still, I couldn't ignore the way it felt to finally watch the cracks spread across Myra's perfect image. For the first time in years, the golden glow around her had started to dim. It started with little comments, dropped casually into conversations, as if they were harmless suggestions. My mom would say, "Lane, you could really bring more people into Myra's place if you offered some tastings there." My dad followed with, "A few trays of your food would draw attention. You wouldn't even have to charge her. Think of it as family helping family." I knew what they were doing. They weren't asking, they were expecting. They thought I'd roll over the way I always had, that I'd quietly pick up the slack where Mira fell short. But this time I didn't bite. "I can't," I told them the first time it came up. "I already have contracts lined up, and my schedule's full." They brushed it off, as if I hadn't spoken. At the next dinner, my mom tried again. "It would be such good exposure for you, sweetie. Imagine people discovering you at Myra's shop." I set my fork down and met her eyes. "I don't need exposure. I have paying clients." The air stiffened. Mira stayed quiet, fiddling with her phone, but the disappointment radiating from my parents was heavy enough to choke on. My dad muttered that I was being stubborn, while my mom shook her head and whispered the word selfish, under her breath, like it was the worst sin a daughter could commit. What cut deeper was the double standard. They had no problem sinking more money into her rent, her advertising, her endless mistakes. Thousands flowed into her boutique with no return, and yet my simple refusal to work for free turned me into the villain. The tension didn't fade, it built. Each dinner turned into a minefield. They'd glance at Mira, then at me, then back at each other, waiting for me to cave. I could feel their judgment every time I said no. I stayed polite, calm, steady, but inside my patience was unraveling. One evening, it boiled over. Mira had just finished another rant about how the town didn't get her, and my parents circled back to me again, pushing the same request dressed in different words. I snapped. Why was my dream too risky, but hers wasn't? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The table went silent. My father's hand froze halfway to his glass. My mother's mouth opened, then shut again. Myra's eyes darted toward me, wide, as if I had broken some unspoken rule. No one answered. For the first time, the weight shifted. I wasn't the invisible one, not in that moment. My question hung in the air, heavy and unmovable, something they couldn't brush aside with empty reassurance. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, and I pushed my chair back. I didn't wait for permission to leave. I stood, walked out, and let the unanswered question echo behind me. The end came quicker than anyone expected. First it was whispers about unpaid invoices, then a letter slipped under the boutique door. Within weeks, Myra's dream unraveled completely. Creditors began calling the house at odd hours, voices sharp and demanding. The once busy storefront now sat dark, mannequins staring blankly through dusty glass. Finally, the landlord posted a notice. The lease was terminated. My parents took the blow almost as hard as Mira. They had poured a fortune into keeping her afloat, patching holes faster than she could create them. When the shop shut down, so did their hope of recovering a single dollar. Tens of thousands gone, just like that. At home, the air was thick with shock. My mom wandered the kitchen in silence, bills stacked high on the counter. My dad paced the living room, muttering numbers under his breath. They looked older overnight, weighed down by disappointment they couldn't admit out loud. Mira, though, refused to sit quietly. She fell apart in loud bursts, storming into rooms with red eyes and snapping at anyone who crossed her path. One night, she cornered me in the hallway. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" she spat, her voice shaking. "You've been waiting for me to screw up. Don't think I don't know. You always wanted me to fail." I stood still, watching her unravel. Her mascara had smeared, her hands trembled, and her words tumbled out faster than she could control. You think you're better than me just because you've got your little whatever it is you're doing. You love this, don't you? Seeing me like this. Admit it. Her bitterness clung to every syllable. It was jealousy stripped bare, her confidence cracked wide open. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words. I had plenty. But nothing I could say would change what she was already screaming at herself. So I kept my lips pressed together, letting the silence stretch. She glared at me, waiting for a reaction. When none came, she broke again, tears streaking her cheeks. With a frustrated cry, she shoved past me and slammed her bedroom door. Behind that door, her sobs carried through the walls. I sat down on the couch, calm in a way I hadn't felt in months. For once, it wasn't me fighting to be heard. It was her voice tearing itself apart, revealing everything she had buried under charm and arrogance. My parents tried to console her, whispering through the wood, promising things would be all right. But nothing they said could fix what was broken. The boutique was gone. The money was gone. And Myra's golden image had shattered with it. I didn't gloat. I didn't argue. I simply let her fury burn itself out. Because her anger wasn't mine to carry. The turning point came when I was asked to provide food for a charity gala at the Civic Center. It was the kind of event where the guest list read like a who's who of the town, business owners, officials, wealthy families. I had never worked anything on that scale before, but I said yes without hesitation. The pressure was overwhelming. For days, I barely slept, preparing dishes that had to impress the toughest critics. On the night of the gala, servers carried my trays through the room while chandeliers glittered overhead. I stood near the back, watching strangers taste my food, waiting for their reactions. It didn't take long. Compliments began circling the room. Guests asked who was behind the menu, organizers sought me out to shake my hand, and by the end of the night, I had more business cards than I could count stuffed in my pocket. My name wasn't just whispered anymore. It was spoken with excitement. One of those conversations led me back to the hotel manager I had worked with before. This time, he wasn't offering me a trial run. He wanted a permanent agreement. His property hosted weddings, conferences, and banquets year-round. If I accepted, it meant stability, not just gig-to-gig survival. I signed the contract with shaking hands, the weight of the paper heavy but thrilling. For the first time, I could breathe. The catering wasn't just covering bills anymore. It was profitable, sustainable, and secure. My calendar filled months in advance. What had started as scraps of opportunity had grown into a full business. Word traveled faster than I expected. Clients recommended me to friends, and soon my reputation stretched beyond town limits. I heard my name mentioned at grocery stores, coffee shops, even whispered by strangers walking past me. People knew I was the one behind those events that left everyone talking. My parents, however, learned about it not from me but from neighbors. A woman down the street told my mom she had attended a banquet catered by that talented Harper girl. Another mentioned how lucky my parents must feel to have such a successful daughter. When my mom called me later, her voice was edged with disbelief. People keep telling me how incredible you've become. I had no idea. I kept my tone even. I've been working at it for a while. There was silence on the line, the kind that carried unspoken regret. I could almost picture her frowning, struggling to piece together how I had built all this without their support. The truth was simple. I hadn't needed them. Every late night, every risk, every sacrifice had carried me here. I had done it without their money, without their praise, without their hand guiding me. And now the whole town knew it too. It happened slowly at first, little attempts from my parents to soften the distance that had grown between us. A phone call here, a text there, each one carefully phrased. Then one evening, they invited me over. The moment I walked through the door, I could sense what was coming. They sat me down in the living room, the same space where years ago they had dismissed my plans without hesitation. My mom folded her hands in her lap, my dad cleared his throat, and both wore expressions that looked like apologies, but not quite. "We always knew you had it in you," my mom began, her smile thin and uneasy. My dad added, "We just wanted you to be safe. You understand that, right?" The words rang hollow. Safe. That wasn't why they had turned me away. It wasn't foresight or caution. It was favoritism. I kept my face calm, listening as they tried to spin the past into something noble, as though they had believed in me all along. I nodded occasionally, but I didn't correct them. Let them cling to their excuses if it helped them sleep at night. I wasn't here for their rewritten version of history. I had lived the real one. Mira wasn't there that night. She avoided me whenever she could. After the boutique's collapse, she had taken a job folding clothes at a chain store across town. It was a quiet humiliation for her, and every time we crossed paths, the resentment in her eyes was sharp enough to cut. She couldn't stand being near me, not after everything. The real moment came at a family dinner a week later. The table looked the same as always, dishes laid out, glasses filled, conversation circling. But something had shifted. For the first time, no one was celebrating Mira. No one asked about her projects or praised her ambition. The spotlight was gone. I sat there, listening to the clatter of forks, feeling the weight of years pressing against my chest. Finally, I set down my napkin and spoke, my voice steady. "You didn't believe in me," I said, looking directly at them, "but I believed in myself. That's why I'm sitting here as a business owner while Myra's store is gone." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The quiet made them heavier. My parents froze, their eyes darting between me and the empty chair where Mira should have been. No one argued. No one tried to soften it this time. I stood, pushed my chair back, and walked toward the door. The house felt smaller than it ever had, walls closing in with all the unspoken things left behind. But once I stepped outside, the air felt different. Cool, open, and mine. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their validation. My success was enough. That was the only revenge I would ever need. Do you think I was right to walk away from them, or should I have given them one more chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.